To members and witnesses for the delay caused to technical difficulties, but I understand from Mr. McKay the Liberal caucus had a very boisterous meeting this morning and put the mics to full use, I understand. We have with us here for the first hour and a half 6 organizations, and I'll list them in order of presentation. First of all, the Canadian Cooperative Association, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, the Canadian Olympic Committee, the Canadian Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance, Canada's research-based pharmaceutical companies, and the Partnership Group for Science and Engineering. If we could ask each of you to have a maximum opening statement of 5 minutes each, and we'll go down the line, and then we'll go immediately to questions from members. So we'll start, I believe, Mr. Anderson, with you.
Thank you very much. My name is John Anderson. I'm Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy for the Canadian Cooperative Association. And I have with me John Julian, who is the Director for International Communications for our organization as well, as we also do a lot of international development work. 2009 marks the Canadian Cooperative Association's 100th birthday. Cooperatives have been an important part of our economy for more than a century and are more relevant than ever today. The cooperative sector in Canada has over 8,800 cooperatives, over 17 million memberships, and is one of the largest in the world on a per capita basis. It has about $275 billion in assets and employs some 150,000 people. Our CCA is one of the 2 national organizations. There's also the Conseil canadien de la coopération et de la mutualité, our Francophone sister organization. Together we have 17 million memberships, and our organization represents 9 million cooperative memberships. What I would like to do today is, in the short time that I have, is to really to concentrate on a couple of issues, and those are ones which we think are related to the economic crisis in the following way. In the sense that we first of all believe that there's 2 kinds of stimulus measures that are needed to ensure prosperity in a sustainable future, which is the question that you asked. And the first kind are tied to the need to improve our social safety net. We're not going to deal with those, although we think those are very important, simply because we only have 3 recommendations that we can put forward. But we are certainly in favor of such issues as a national anti-poverty strategy. The second kind of measures are those dealing with establishing and enhancing programs designed to create and maintain jobs at the local community level. And we're going to concentrate on those. As well, we think that we cannot turn the Canadian and the world economy around by concentrating solely on our own economy. As citizens of one of the world's richest countries, we have a duty and obligation to help those in developing countries. And that's why one of our recommendations touches on international development. So the first of our recommendations is to help create more jobs at the community level by establishing a cooperative investment strategy. We're very pleased that the government renewed our Cooperative Development Initiative, which is a program designed to help new emerging cooperatives as well as innovative cooperative projects, and that is now managed by the cooperative sector. But we also think more has to be done. And one of the problems that cooperatives has, because they're differently organized, is that they do not have the same access to traditional sources of investment capital. That's why what we're proposing is a cooperative investment strategy consisting of a cooperative investment plan, which is a tax credit for members and employees of agriculture and employee-owned cooperatives. And this is based on a program which has existed in Quebec since 1985, which exists still in Quebec at the provincial level, called in French it's called the Régime d'investissement coopératif, and it has been a very successful program in Quebec. And what's important about what this ask is that it is not simply an ask for government funds. This is a partnership between cooperative members and the government, in the sense that the government benefits from the investment of cooperative members and their employees in cooperatives, which help to create jobs. Okay. As well, we are calling for a cooperative development fund, which would be a repayable loan fund rather than a source of grant funding, and which would involve also credit unions and cooperative involvement in the fund. Our second ask is around expanding the Community Adjustment Fund. We think that this is an excellent program. We think that it's not enough. We are just saying it should be doubled and it should be $2 billion over the 2 years. And we also think that there should be a dedicated part of it which would touch on cooperatives and social enterprises. And thirdly, and I think I'm almost done, right, in terms of time. So the third, just very quickly, is that we are calling to increase our international aid spending and promote a greater role for civil society. We are asking the federal government to increase our international development aid spending by an average of 15% a year for the next 10 years in order to reach the internationally agreed target for aid spending of 0.7% of gross national income. We also want Canada to continue its leadership role in promoting a greater role for civil society, including cooperatives in the delivery of development assistance. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now go to the Canadian Union of Public Employees.
Thank you very much. My name is Toby Sanger. I'm a senior economist for the Canadian Union of Public Employees. And thank you very much to the committee for the opportunity to present our recommendations for the upcoming federal budget. I just wanted to say at the outset, I think that this is a really important exercise. I think we all appreciate it, and it is really great that the pre-budget consultations are going ahead this year. I believe that there should be more public participation in the budget-making process. It's the most important thing that government does, and I think we all appreciate that. So I'm really glad that it's happening this year instead of necessarily going to the polls at this time. The CUPE, Canadian Union of Public Employees, is Canada's largest and most diverse union. We represent approximately 600,000 people who work and live in communities all across the country, who work in hospitals, schools, municipalities, universities, libraries, seniors' homes, childcare centres, electric and water utilities, transportation, and also in many private businesses as well. Every day we benefit and we depend and benefit from the work that our members do. As we all know, this past year has been an extraordinary year for the economy. For the first time in over 60 years, overall global economic output has fallen. Worldwide, this recession is expected to put 50 million people out of work by the end of this year, including an additional 500,000 in Canada. Just this morning, an OECD report came out that said that unemployment is expected to rise to 10%. Just a week ago, the head of the IMF said that the unemployment problem is likely to be the third wave of this economic crisis. The situation would have been much worse if governments around the world had not taken unprecedented action to stimulate the economy. I think that we really need to take this lesson to heart as people are getting concerned about the deficit. There would not be growth in the economy now if governments had not taken this action. I commend you and government officials for recognizing the severity of this crisis and taking strong action. As a result, we are starting to see signs of growth in the economy and GDP. Still, we are not out of this. While GDP and the stock markets may be rising, people are still unemployed, and unemployment is likely to keep on rising through next year. Most economists expect this recovery to be relatively slow, sluggish, and fragile. There would be no economic growth without these stimulus actions, and withdrawing them too soon could plunge the economy back into recession. For these pre-budget consultations, the committee asked 2 questions and requested no more than 3 specific recommendations. We have a lot more priorities than this, but we tried to stick to 3. The first question is, what stimulus measures have been effective and how could they be improved? Our submission attempts to answer these broad questions, but I'd like to emphasize a few key points. Public investment in spending and support for the unemployed and people with low income provides much more bang for the buck and generates many more jobs than tax cuts do. Secondly, infrastructure and construction stimulus spending could be improved by focusing it on areas that would provide greater long-term benefits, for instance, as part of a national green investment plan. Going forward, the federal government needs to reinvest more in public services and not use the deficit as an excuse to cut. Working families did not cause this recession and should not be forced to pay for it through reduced public services. Even if GDP starts to grow this year, job markets and working Canadians will still be in recession through next year. That's why our 3 specific recommendations deal with immediate needs. Our first recommendation is that the federal government create an economic recovery fund to provide funding for pressing social and economic needs to be cost-shared with other levels of government. The recession has meant a big increase in the need and demand for social services, for training and education, while the agencies and institutions providing these services are facing shortfalls in their revenue. As a result, we're seeing cuts in programs and layoffs just when they should be expanding. Our second recommendation is that the employment insurance system be improved. We have a number of recommendations on this. Extending benefits. The duration of benefits is a positive step, but we've also called for a uniform entrance requirement of 360 hours for access to regular benefits. Too many people, and especially too many women who pay into this system, are denied benefits when they become unemployed through no fault of their own. Our third recommendation is that our public pension system be improved. We've got a number of recommendations on this. We've called for a national pension summit and for a phased-in doubling of CPP benefits, but neither of these are really budgetary matters. Our priority recommendation in this area for the budget is that the federal government increase the guaranteed income supplement for seniors by at least 15%. This would help lift almost all seniors out of poverty and cost approximately $1 billion per year. The cost of either of these measures for 1 year could be paid by cancelling what we consider the wasteful billion-dollar P3 fund that uses the public's money to subsidize privatization and private profits. Thank you for inviting us to present this morning, and I welcome any questions that members of the committee may have.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to the Canadian Olympic Committee, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just take a moment to introduce myself and tell you a little bit about why I'm here. Je m'appelle Thérèse Brisson. J'ai fait partie de l'équipe.
My name is Thérèse Brisson. I am here representing the Canadian Olympic Committee. My team won several medals at the Olympics, including the gold medal and the silver medal in 1998. We've always sought to realize our full potential throughout my career.
A PhD before going on to a first career as a professor and researcher, and after leaving my job in academia to train and compete at the Salt Lake City Games, I went back to school, did an MBA, and joined Procter & Gamble shortly thereafter in Miss Finley's riding, where today I run the largest business in our home care division. I'm a member of the COC Board of Directors, and I have with me here today Chris Rudge, who's our CEO and Secretary General, as well as Alex Bauman, our Chief Technical Officer for Own the Podium. He's, of course, a multiple Olympic gold medalist and a world record holder in swimming and one of my personal Olympic heroes. For me, I first experienced the power of sport to inspire the hopes and dreams of a nation as a child at the Montreal Games. Yet, even as a very little girl of 9 years old, I was wondering, why aren't we doing better? It really challenged my view, a youthful and inspired one, that Canada was the best country to live in the world, and even my own potential as a Canadian. With Own the Podium, we have been doing better, a lot better. And I'm here today because of my deep pride in Canada, my passion for winning, and a vision to inspire Canadian excellence in sport and through sport. And it's a vision I know you share, and one that you can really help achieve with the $22 million investment in Own the Podium that I'm here to ask you for today. What is Own the Podium? It provides enhanced high-performance sport programming to Canadian athletes and teams with medal potential. Let me give you a personal example. With Podium 2002, which was a precursor to Own the Podium, our women's hockey team had a month-long summer training camp in Valcartier, in the military reserve in Valcartier, Quebec. We had a full-time massage therapist who traveled with the team, a sports psychologist. We had a goalie coach for the first time, and we all know how important that is in hockey. We had a lunch meal plan right on campus where we trained at the University of Calgary that cut down on all the running around and allowed a real 100% focus on the training. These are things we didn't have in 1998, and they're the little things that made the big difference, and that's what Own the Podium does. What are the results? Because that's what we're all about in sport, and I know here we're all about results. Let me tell you a little bit about that. Own the Podium has delivered outstanding results. In winter sport, we've moved from 4th in 2002 to 1st in the world rankings in 2009, and that makes our goal of being 1st overall in the medal count in Vancouver within reach. In summer sport, we tied for 13th in 2008 in Beijing, and that's up from 19th spot in 2004 in Athens. That's a key result. I think some of the other important things that athletes believe and Own the Podium. For the first time, we believe we're on a level playing field with all of our competitors. Our competitors actually now believe we have something they don't, and that gives us a competitive edge. And finally, I think most importantly, Canadians believe. They see the leadership and they see smart government investment that delivers results for Canadians, and all Canadians will share in the success and celebration of sport in Vancouver. You know, one of the best things about being an athlete is sharing the Olympic experience with Canadians. And I actually brought my medal here today, and I'd love to be able to share that with you. Please feel free to pass that around the room. You know, one of the things I have learned is that two things. First of all, Canadians really care. In Salt Lake City, 1 in 5 Canadians watched that gold medal game, something that blew me away. That's how much it engages Canadians. The second thing is that Canadians are really inspired by our win versus the U.S. Home team favorites, facing the adversity of 9 penalties in a row, and from the American referees. And I think it's because Canadians identified with us. We were the girls next door, and we reacted to adversity in a way that they'd like to react when faced with same. And that's what Canadians tell me, that our win has helped them face challenges, whether it be starting exercise program, dealing with illness, or family breakups or job losses. So the challenge we face today is, $22 million of the $70 million in Own the Podium and annual funding will not be available after 2010. And that's the investment we're looking for from you today. Why should you invest in Own the Podium? Because a small investment makes a big difference. It allows our best young athletes to reach their potential. International success unites and excites Canadians from all regions, unlike anything else. Striving for excellence and achieving it sets an example that inspires Canadians in all walks of life, whether that be sport, the arts, education, or in business. Now is the right time to invest in Own the Podium during these challenging times as we climb out of this recession. Canadian needs their heroes more than ever. Don't put ceilings on those young hopes and dreams. Thank you for your attention and for your support of this recommendation to provide $22 million a year for support for Own the Podium.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I think all the committee would like to thank you for representing Canada so well. And I know there are a few hockey players around the table here, so you'll probably get some very good questions later. Next, we'll go to the Canadian Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Peter Valaket. I'm here on behalf of the Canadian Natural Gas Vehicle Alliance. And once again, thank you for the opportunity to appear here today as a representative of that association. Heavy natural gas vehicles provide a proven, cost-effective way to reduce carbon emissions and improve local air quality using Canadian technology. Greenhouse gas emissions from on-road heavy diesel vehicles are a growing problem in Canada. Heavy diesel vehicles includes trucks, buses, and heavy work vehicles. Emissions from heavy diesel vehicles have increased by 19 megatons since 1990. This represents about half of the growth in carbon emissions from on-road vehicles since 1990. Heavy diesel vehicles are also expected to be one of the fastest growing areas of energy use through 2020. Natural Resources Canada expects the efficiency gains will only partly offset the projected growth in emissions from heavy diesel vehicles. Existing federal policy measures and changes to diesel vehicle technology will have little impact on emissions from heavy diesel vehicles. There are proven lower-emission technologies that can reduce emissions compared to heavy diesel vehicles. Heavy natural gas vehicles from original equipment manufacturers are a leading green technology solution. Canadian companies are world leaders in the area of lower-emission natural gas engine technologies. Westport Innovations and its joint venture company, Cummins Westport, produce the lowest emission internal combustion engines available for heavy vehicles. These engines are available in a range of heavy trucks and buses that are sold by original equipment manufacturers. The Government of Canada needs to encourage the use of best available commercial technology if current heavy diesel vehicle greenhouse gas trends are to be slowed and ultimately reversed. Canada's natural gas vehicle industry has 3 recommendations to reduce the harmful environmental impact of heavy vehicles. 1. Invest $1.5 billion in sustaining long-term fiscal measures to lower the capital barrier to adoption for commercial fleets that purchase lower-emission vehicles, including heavy natural gas vehicles. This funding would target 10% of heavy vehicles used in Canada. It would accelerate the replacement of older, higher-emission diesel vehicles. there would be a 7.5 megaton carbon benefit over the life of the vehicles as a result of implementing this recommendation. 2, tie fiscal measures to emissions reductions effectiveness as measured on a well-to-wheels or life cycle basis. For example, heavy natural gas vehicles reduce carbon emissions by 20 to 25%. If a renewable natural gas or biomethane produced from waste sources is used, the carbon benefit increases to 85 to 90% on a life cycle basis. 3, support early-stage market development activities, including vehicle demonstrations and education and outreach efforts, so as to build awareness, reduce perceived risk, and engage heavy vehicle commercial fleet owners. Fleet owners want to reduce their fuel costs and green their fleets. Heavy natural gas vehicles have a lower cost per kilometer and can reduce the environmental impact of fleet operations. Encouraging the use of heavy natural gas vehicles also means more green-collar jobs for Canadians in vehicle, component, and refueling station manufacturing. The Government of Canada can act to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from heavy diesel vehicles. Heavy natural gas vehicles provide a cost-effective, lower emission solution using made in Canada technology. This means cleaner air for Canadians, more jobs for Canadians, increased Canadian competitiveness, all while 1, capitalizing on Canadian technology, and 2, with little to no lifestyle impact. Thank you for your interest in this issue, and I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now go to RX&D. Mr. Williams, please.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis Russell Williams, président de la compagnie.
Thank you very much. My name is Russell Williams. I'm the president of the Canada's research-based pharmaceutical companies.
Merci pour l'opportunité de discuter cette question importante avec vous. Vous avez reçu.
We appreciate this opportunity to appear before the committee. You have our written submission, but we will use our time today to present our 3 recommendations. Our company is comprised of 50 innovative companies throughout this country and employs close to 20,000 Canadians in highly skilled jobs. Their goal is to develop new medicines and vaccines that can help Canadians live longer, healthier, and more productive lives.
In this country. Let me give you just a couple of figures here, is that we are the largest single source of health R&D from the business enterprise sector. We invest well over $1 billion in research and development in new medicines and vaccines in Canada, and this has been maintained over a number of years. Almost $150 million of that is directly in our Canadian universities. Access to new medicines for patients, stability, sustainability, and predictability are very important to us if we are going to maintain our presence that we have and, in fact, grow our presence in this country. Our industry has a number of challenges that we hope to be able to address soon. One is the difficult access and a reimbursement environment that's more and more stringent. Increased global competition for research and development dollars. Expiration of patents. You look over the next 2011, 12, and 13, you'll see a number of the patents terminate and something that we call the patent cliff. A huge challenge for us. And a great risk and a lot of cost in the whole development of new medicines. Si on veut rester concurrentiel avec le reste du monde,
If we want to remain competitive with the rest of the world, we need to sustain an environment that will support each company make proper investments. We have approximately $1 billion invested in scientific research and new development, and we only represent 3% of the market. We're not seeking more money. We simply want to create an environment in which we can raise funds here in Canada. And we want to increase that 1% of pharmaceutical R&D investments. I don't know to what level, but it certainly must not stay at 1%.
Look to the future. Be focused on the future and look at the long-term policies and investments that will, 1, build on our healthcare system, and 2, strategically place Canada in a position that we can compete for those global mandates. To develop a sustainable, world-class, innovative pharmaceutical sector in Canada and build a continued investment in the life science research, the federal government should look at the following areas, and I'll focus on 3. 1 is an expanded scientific research and experimental development, the SHRED it's called, definition. Right now, in the OECD countries, Canada has a very limited definition of what is considered a SHRED acceptable tax credit. It doesn't include some of the epidemiology studies. It doesn't include some of the post-surveillance marketing studies that we're doing. They'll be working with Health Canada. It doesn't include social services. So an expanded definition of that, and if the government could move forward to not more than the OECD countries, but to that same level, it would make a huge difference. Deuxièmement, c'est très important, c'est la stabilité et les prévisibilités de la...
Secondly, we need to be concerned with intellectual property stability and predictability. We need a best-in-class intellectual property regime, and this has to be reinforced if we are to compete internationally.
Various regulatory and policy environment in Canada. So cut through, there's a lot of jargon there, but put the money in a good place, where there's good compliance that doesn't need increased funds, where there is growing challenges and expectations, like in Health Canada, adjust those funds to be appropriate, change the business model and work with them and build partnerships with the industry. So strategically use the limited dollars. Just to highlight at the end, and let's not forget the value of medicines. We do save lives. We now have people living with cancer much longer than they ever did. We've reduced hospitalization and mortality in cardiovascular illness by almost 60%. We are a healthcare partner, so if we can build that innovation agenda, that there is a strong partnership in healthcare, and the economic incentives that I mentioned, I think then we could move towards what the Canadian Council of Academics suggested, is that we could play a leading role in health innovation as we are improving the productivity in our healthcare system. Time doesn't permit to go farther, but thank you very much for this opportunity to give you our 3 recommendations. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. We'll now go to the Partnership Group for Science and Engineering.
Thank you very much. Honourable members of the committee, my name is Rhys Casson. I'm the chair of PAGSI, as we know it, and with me is Denise Saint-Onge. There's a natural tendency during times of crisis to retrench and wait out the storm. But taking this approach to the current global recession will not promote sustained economic recovery, largely because the nature of the global economy will change in the meantime. The Canadian science and engineering community feels that Canada must not only be ready to accommodate these changes, but to lead them as well. How do we do this? Canada must nurture and promote a culture of discovery and innovation. It is only through new ideas and new ways of seeing the world that we will be able to identify opportunities and ensure economic prosperity for the future. Just like Wayne Gretzky did for hockey, we will lead by being the ones to change the way the game is played. Economic recovery, therefore, requires a toolbox of sorts that contains, on the one hand, a mixture of short-term stimulus measures, and on the other, longer-term investments to support and promote a culture of discovery and innovation. And in this light, the Partnership Group makes 3 recommendations. The first is that government increase productivity by improving Canada's research and technical capacity. The simplest way of doing this is through a strong federal commitment to funding basic and applied research. Investments made now will translate into economic productivity in the future. President Obama, for example, recently committed the United States to investing 3% of GDP for research, an amount that exceeds that spent during the golden years of scientific and engineering research during the space race. By contrast, Canada invests just 1.9% of GDP. This, taken together with the increasing competition for talent from abroad, means that Canada is in danger of reversing the gains in our capacity for research and innovation that we've made in recent years. Indeed, there's some evidence that this reversal may have already started. Star young researchers have recently left Canadian universities for academic positions in Australia and the United States, and they've cited the loss of funding for key climate change research programs as a major reason. Stemming this impending tide requires increased federal investments in research, ideally to at least the level committed by President Obama. And this can be accomplished through support for the federal granting councils, key agencies, and government labs. Our second recommendation is that the government provide long-term support for major research facilities and collaborations. These initiatives play a vital role in generating knowledge and training students, and this knowledge is crucial to well-informed policy and regulatory decisions. We can take as an example the Experimental Lakes Area, or ELA for short, in Western Ontario. Since the 1960s, this facility has been playing the role of, if you like, laboratory mouse, allowing us to study the health of our freshwater resources directly through experiments. This work at the ELA has led to regulations that have helped stave off the massive die-offs in fish populations in the Great Lakes that were due to acid rain and phosphorus coming from detergents and sewage. Continued support for this and comparable facilities across the country, and especially in the Arctic, is essential to sustaining both a healthy environment and a vigorous economy. Our third recommendation is that the government create a prestigious Research Fellows program for postdoctoral researchers. Canada continues to export its best and brightest PhD students abroad to complete their training post-PhD. And let me share with you an experience of my own in this regard. I recently lost a star student, one who had published a paper in Nature after completing just 1 year of his degree. And to put that into context, that's probably the equivalent of winning the Stanley Cup or a gold medal as a 15-year-old in hockey. Okay? And I lost him to a major U.S. school simply because I lacked sufficient funds to keep him here in Canada. Furthermore, Canada is not looked upon internationally as an attractive place for postdoctoral studies, especially next to competitor countries such as the UK, the United States, and Australia, which all have prestigious postdoctoral programs designed to help young researchers establish their careers. We therefore strongly urge the government to create a premier postdoctoral fellowship program aimed at young PhD graduates. This program will fill the gap in training for Canadian students and attract outstanding international graduates to Canada. It would also constitute a major injection of intellectual capital into our system. If you like, an ideas-ready program that would complement and capitalize on the investments created by the shovel-ready stimulus projects of last year. Summing up, let me reiterate our three recommendations. Number one, increase federal investments in research. Number two, ensure long-term support for major research projects. And number three, establish a premier postdoctoral research fellows program. These recommendations provide the tools necessary for economic recovery, and they constitute a strong federal commitment to discovery-driven research and the people who do it. Finally, I'd just like to add that one of the activities of PAGSI is the Bacon and Eggheads Breakfast series. Our first one for the new session is September 29th. Frank Plummer is coming, and we hope to see you there. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for your presentation. I was going to thank you for your role in that, and obviously with H1N1 it will be a very topical issue with Dr. Plummer. We'll start with questions from members. We'll start with Mr. McKay, please, for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses. My first question is to Mr. Anderson, and is with respect to recommendation number 3, increase our international aid spending and promote greater role for civil society. You are very helpful in the, you and your organization are very helpful with respect to C-293, the Better Aid Bill. It was received royal assent in May of 2008. The first reporting period is at the end of this month. The government has had essentially a year and a half in order to improve its delivery of aid, focus on poverty alleviation and human rights, and take into account the perspectives of the poor. Over that period of time, have you seen any change in the government's approach to aid?
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to answer that question over to my colleague, John Julian, who works specifically in the International Development Fund.
At this point, it's difficult to comment on that. I mean, our programming is mostly long-term and multi-year, so we haven't seen any immediate changes. However, I would say that we're, like you, very much looking forward to the end of this reporting period and the first report back from CEDA and the government on Canada's Development Assistance Program. As the Development Assistance Accountability Act enshrines, our organization is very much committed to the idea that Canada's official development assistance should be about poverty alleviation first and foremost, and we're anxious certainly to see the proof that in fact that's been enshrined and that in fact we're moving in that direction.
Thank you. Do you have any comment with respect to the minister's announcement of the reprofiling of our aid recipients, where they moved from the sort of the desperately poor to the less desperately poor, and in both the minister's speech and in the press release and in the announcements to follow, none of those items mentioned poverty alleviation or anything to do with that bill?
We certainly are somewhat concerned about the reprofiling and the change in country focuses. Our organization, like many others, works in all of the regions of the world. We work in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But again, the desperately poor are primarily in Africa, and we are certainly concerned by any sense that we're backing away from Africa. We have excellent partners there. incredible capabilities, human resources to work with, and they just need the assistance of organizations like ours and the Canadian International Development Agency and Canadian government to move ahead. So we certainly would encourage the government to look again at that list of countries, to look again at Rwanda and Sierra Leone and some of the other countries that seem to have fallen off the maps, places that are on their knees but are able to stand if we give them a bit of a hand.
Thank you for that, Mr. Julian. Unfortunately, I got a limited amount of time, so I have to move on to Mr. Sanger. With respect to your second proposal, 360 hours for access to regular employment insurance benefits, it appears that one party in particular would prefer a long tenured extension as opposed to a more equity in the system, shall we say. So my first question is, if you had a choice between 360 hours and the long tenured extension, what would you choose? The second is, do you prefer the government's analysis of the cost or the parliamentary budget officer's cost analysis, which seems remarkably parallel to your own?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I did notice earlier this week that the parliamentary budget officer had come up with estimates that were fairly similar to the ones that we've used in terms of the 360 hours. We were restricted to 3 recommendations. Unfortunately, we think that the employment insurance system needs to be improved in a number of different ways, in terms of duration, in terms of access, and in terms of benefits. And the one that we have here in the submission is 360 hours in terms of access to regular EI benefits. I think that the changes that were announced, and I understand that there was some legislation that was introduced, are a positive step, but they're one step. I think further steps need to be made. I also just want to use this opportunity to talk about other problems. At the same time that we're talking about improving the employment insurance system, we also need to be concerned about people who are becoming increasingly unemployed. Half of the increase in unemployment has been among youth. We're starting to see universities, it was interesting hearing from Mr. Casson, universities start to lay off, not renew students, teaching assistants. At this time, the public sector should not be cutting jobs in this way. There should be more funding in these areas.
Thank you for that, Mr. Sanger, and indeed I would like to carry on with those kinds of lines of questions. I just want to say to Ms. Bryson, for those of us who pretend to be hockey players, you make us all proud, and I can't imagine any party that would support your proposal. So thank you for making the effort to come here and making that very excellent presentation. But unfortunately, I have a limited amount of time, so I'm going to move on to Dr. Klassen. With respect to recommendation number 3, the government created a prestigious and competitive research fellows program, postdoctorate. I have a personal bias on that point. I have a son in a program such as that, but he is not in this country. One of the things that seems to happen is that it seems to get sucked up in a lot of these programs seem to get sucked up into people who do financing. I mean, it just seems to die on the ground with lawyers and MBA people, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of the money seems to end up in that kind of research. And I see that you even are concerned about social science here. So is your idea here a hardcore engineering, medical research, that kind of postdoctoral fellow?
Okay, Mr. Casson, about 30 seconds, if you could.
Well, my group is the Partnership Group for Science and Engineering, so yes, that would be the answer. I mean, of course, I would be supportive of postdoctoral funding across the board. But yes, what we want to see right now, Canadian postdoctoral funding's landscape is very limited, and particularly relative to our competitor countries, and so we'd like to see that expanded and opportunities given.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McKay. We'll go to M. Laforêt.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, bonjour à tous les témoins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Sanger. Now, among your members within the Canadian Union of Public Employees, Now, since in one of your recommendations you are demanding that the government create a uniform eligibility criterion with respect to employment insurance, so I presume that you have members within your union throughout Canada. So can you provide me any examples of people within your union who have been prejudiced because of the current EI criteria? I know that there are varying rules that change between provinces, and that workers located in British Columbia to the Maritimes and don't necessarily get the same benefits.
Thank you very much for that question. Our membership is about 60 to 70% women, and a lot of them are not very well paid. A lot of people work in part-time jobs as well, in long-term care facilities and other facilities, and there's certainly a number of them who may not be qualified if they are laid off in various ways in different parts of the country. I cannot give you specific names in this way, but certainly there would be an impact on some of our members.
Okay, je vous remercie. Madame Brisson.
Thank you. Ms. Brisson, I have a question for you. You're talking about a shortfall of $22 million that we can anticipate after 2010 in terms of the government's lack of funding for certain programs for athletes. Do you have any comparative studies? And do you know what the situation is like abroad and in other countries to look at what the proportion is per capita in terms of funding for sports? Are there any other countries in the world that give more money or provide a better structure? Answer, thank you for your question. Right now I work in Toronto, and so my French is not very good.
Is that with On the Podium, we've done things a little bit differently, and we have brought all the funding partners to invest in one pool. Okay, and that's very important, very different than what we've done in the past. And we have actually increased the investment through federal government support as well as VANOC sponsors, or Vancouver Olympic sponsors. And so that has made a big difference, and we've had a lot of results. Now, if you look at the G8 countries where we like to compare ourselves, and these are the countries that we're aiming to be first in Vancouver, and we're aiming to be among the top countries in the world. When we compare ourselves to other G8 nations, we are the bottom of the list of other G8 nations. And certainly when we look to countries like Australia, a very small country with extraordinary performances, very focused on summer games, we are certainly at the bottom of that pack. Yeah.
Pas souvent l'occasion de m'adresser à des athlètes.
I do not get the opportunity to meet gold medal athletes very often, so once again I want to congratulate you. Mr. Williams, my next question is for you. As regards research-based pharmaceutical companies, I know that there are many located in Quebec, and during the 80s and 1990s, the government of Quebec had introduced measures that led to a very high concentration of pharmaceutical companies to set up operations in Quebec. So what should the federal government do in keeping with the measures that the Quebec government had taken in the past? Answer. Yes. Thank you for the question. Some 50% of our research is done in Quebec. And I think it's the presidents and CEOs of companies that decide where to invest Firstly, the government must facilitate access to markets. Secondly, we should have a tax credit system that is much more in keeping with our times. And the third thing that the government can do is reinforce intellectual property laws. Now, those are three specific things that Canada can do to improve our global standing. Now, within the IP system, the intellectual property system, well, you're appearing before this committee and making certain recommendations, but is there any other forum within the federal government or any other committee that you could appear before to press these demands? Perhaps another piece of legislation should be introduced in order to address your issues. Answer, yes, indeed. We have made presentations in many fora. Obviously, this budget deals with tax measures, and that's exactly why we were talking about tax credits for research. But if we take a long-term perspective, well, take the Merck-Rosser company, which remained open in Quebec. All of its subsidiaries had closed except for those located in Quebec, and that is a combination of strong intellectual property regulations as well as the tax environment and the tax credits that were made available to that company. And that's exactly why we are going to continue to insist on these three recommendations that we've made here. Thank you.
Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for your presentations today, and to Ms. Brisson, I want to welcome you as a fellow resident of Mississauga, a town which creates and is responsible for many great Canadian hockey stars, including yourself and Johnny Bower. So I'm very pleased to see you here, and thank you for your presentation. I have a question to start for Mr. Sanger of CUPE. I want to thank you for your presentation as well. You pointed out the positive impact that infrastructure stimulus spending by our government has had on our economy so far. And just earlier today, I noted that the chief economist of the Royal Bank of Canada, that's the current chief economist of the Royal Bank of Canada, Craig Wright, says the economy is advancing because aggressive policy actions are taking effect. We expect that Canada's recession will turn out to be the least severe of the past three, which is good news, I think, for everyone. I was interested in your proposal re green infrastructure investments. And as you know, in our budget of 2009, the government launched the Green Infrastructure Fund, which committed over $1 billion to support sustainable energy and municipal wastewater management infrastructure investments. I was wondering if you could comment on the impact of the Green Infrastructure Fund and what you would suggest should be done in the future to enhance that program.
I don't have all the details in terms of the impact of the Green Infrastructure Fund. I frankly think that all of the infrastructure, or that a much higher share of the infrastructure spending should have been connected to various environmental objectives in various ways. I think that there had been a requirement under the previously for infrastructure spending for communities that received infrastructure spending to have some sustainability planning in place, and I think that was a positive move, and I think that more of that should be done. There is a problem in that you're trying to get the money out quickly, but at the same time, I think you do need to look towards long-term productivity and benefits. In terms of this recession, the GDP may start to increase, but unemployment is expected to keep on rising. When most people experience a recession, it's through their jobs and through their income, not through measures such as the stock market or GDP.
So what would you suggest in terms of dollar amounts that the government should be investing in green infrastructure? I note that, for example, in my area, the government is jointly with the government of Ontario investing $500 million in GO Transit. which will help people leave their cars at home and take transit. Obviously, it has great benefits for our environment. There's also a lot of money being spent on wastewater treatment and new water supply management infrastructure investments. Just in my riding alone, there's a new 2,000 new parking spaces being created at GO train stations to take 2,000 more cars off the road every day. Is that the kind of thing you'd like to see more of? And maybe you could give us an idea of what dollar amount you think should be spent.
I'm sorry. I mean, we included some dollar amounts in terms of an additional green collar jobs program as part of this as a recession recovery fund. But I think that, as I said before, a key thing is to tie some of more of the infrastructure spending that is going out right now. I think it should be increased, but to tie more of it also to further environmental objectives. Okay. So it's not just the dollar amount, but tying it to those things. And I think that there also needs to be a focus in terms of the jobs in that area. There's a great opportunity. I think that we're really missing out on it. And this is a really serious point. The infrastructure that we're putting in place right now is going to last for decades. We've been told that we need to reduce our emissions by 80% by 2050. If we're putting in infrastructure now that's going to last for decades until that time, let's get it right now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I have a further question for Dr. Casson. I was very interested in your presentation as well, Dr. Casson, and you mentioned that you would recommend that the government increase federal funding for research. I think you probably know that a fair amount was done in that regard in our most recent budget, including $200 million for industrial research assistance, $87.5 million for the Canada Graduate Scholarships Program, $750 million for research infrastructure through the Canada Foundation for Innovation, $120.4 million to fund 134 new or renewed Canada research chairs in 37 Canadian universities, $48 million to expand the new College and Community Innovation Program to establish research partnerships between colleges and local businesses across Canada. Of course, there was the $2 billion Knowledge Infrastructure Program, which is creating in Mississauga a new $70 million building at the University of Toronto, Mississauga, to create laboratories and classroom space for 700 new students a year, and a new campus of Sheridan College in Mississauga. I wonder if you could give us a sense of, in addition to those investments, what additional investments you would suggest, and again, how much would you suggest that the government be spending in that regard?
Invest in people. Quite simply. Certainly the infrastructure investments have been welcome, and they've added immensely to university centers and research institutes across the country. But they will be hollow investments unless you also invest in the people who do the research. That's as much as I have to say.
So, for example, there's an investment of $50 million in quantum computing. I believe that is for people. $136 million in university-based social science and humanities research to support 2,500 of Canada's best researchers. That's more of that sort of thing.
Very briefly, Mr. Casson.
And I would emphasize that it's through basic research and discovery-driven research, for example, through the funding councils, the tri-councils, the CIHR, the NSERC, and SHRC, that
we announced $250 million to upgrade federal labs, including National Research Council facilities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Decker. Do you have a final 2-second, Mr. Casson? Or no? Let's go to Mr. Mulcair.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like my colleagues, I wish to thank our witnesses who have made their presentations, and I want to tell Ms. Brisson how moving I found her presentation to be. Mr. Williams and I actually played hockey together. We played against Ontario members, and it included Minister Flaherty, and in fact we won. And so I just wanted to tell you that to avoid any conflict of interest. And that was a very long time ago, before YouTube came and entered the scene. My first question is for the Canadian Cooperative Association. Thank you very much for your brief. And really, I have kind of a technical question for you, because in Quebec, when it comes to talking about the need for greater federal government investment in housing, one tends to avoid certain words such as affordable housing, because in Quebec, one is afraid that affordable is tantamount to private. And so in Quebec, we tend to talk about social housing. So can you please elaborate on your first recommendation, being that there be increased social housing and that it be taken under the purview of cooperatives? So am I understanding you correctly? Answer, yes. Yes, certainly. We do use both terms alternately.
Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, which is one of our members, has approximately 95,000 cooperative housing units in Canada. So and those are middle and lower, geared to middle and lower income families. So that you have a combination, you could all look at them as affordable housing or logement abordable, but also as social housing, because they all have a component in them which for low-income citizens to get access to housing. We think that the cooperative model, because it is a model where the citizens themselves control that housing and manage that housing, because it's based on the one member, one vote, we think that it is a very good model in ways of delivering affordable housing.
We share your view, and we're also quite concerned that a lot of co-ops that have existed for a certain number of years, that had long-term agreements with the federal government, if those are not renewed, then a lot of them might be lost to the...
That's certainly one of our concerns, and we hope that this situation will be looked at in the near future.
Thank you.
Certainly it's coming to an end.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Williams, maintenant que j'ai dévoilé mon conflit d'intérêt.
Mr. Williams, now that I have disclosed my conflict of interest, well, you talked about the availability of innovative drugs here in Canada. It's a problem. So what can the government do in concrete terms to improve that situation? Answer. Thank you for the question, and thank you for reminding me of those very special memories. I think the government can make sure that it spends public money appropriately. It can either spend the money through Health Canada, where it makes sure that standards are solid and that we are not causing any delays. But there are other government departments where things run smoothly, and so perhaps we don't need to continue investing the same amounts of money year after year. So if I were to answer your question generally, I think we need to look at the decision-making process when it comes to issuing licenses and notices of compliance. And the government must be more strategic in how it spends public money. This affects the CDR, the Common Drug Review, and provinces. And the government must make sure that there are no artificial delays. We have to put ourselves in the shoes of patients. Obviously, if one wants access to a life-saving drug, they want it immediately. Now, could you please talk to us about the next wave of technical unemployment and the possibility that there could be a lot of layoffs in the high-tech sector? Because, in fact, we believe that there is going to be some major issues facing the public sector. And we believe that the next wave of job losses is going to be in certain sectors. So I'd like to hear Mr. Sanger's comments on that.
About this, most of the job loss so far has been in the private sector, but it's just recently that we're starting to see some public sector job losses. I'm not just saying this because we represent public employees, but during a recession, public sector employees should not be laid off. I mean, the government should be trying to stimulate the economy, and it was very refreshing to see a change in economic philosophy over the past year on this. Now, we're very concerned that governments now become fixated on deficits and reducing deficits. All of a sudden, there was a change in perspective, and people recognize that we do need some fiscal, that we need spending in this area. We've seen some layoffs more in the educational sector just recently. Very concerned about that expanding later, and if there's rising unemployment, there's a possibility that we may have a double dip recession in this way. In previous recessions, the government essentially caused the recessions by hiking up interest rates in the past two recessions. It's that to a certain extent is a fact. And so they were able to get the economy going by lowering interest rates. Now we can't get interest rates any lower. So we have to have fiscal policy, and we have to have a strong public sector to keep the economy going. Not just to provide public services, but to keep the economy going so we don't have a double-dip recession.
Merci.
Est-ce que j'ai le temps pour une autre question?
No,
I have enough time for another question? A very brief question, sir. But in any case, I just wanted to make a comment and thank Mr. Casson for his excellent presentation, as well as the presence of Mr. Saint-Onge.
Invest in people. We're going to remember that one, and we're going to keep pushing. And your presentation at these hearings is very helpful to remind us that you're the upstream part of Mr. Williams' downstream equation with regard to the importance of research and development in our country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mulcair. We'll go to Ms. Hall-Finlay, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Ms. Brisson, not maybe the only one around the table who is not a hockey player, but having been a competitive skier, I do appreciate everything that you do, and I think, Mr. Rudge, we've encountered each other a couple of times at the bottom of Ski Canada and an Alpine Ontario event, so it's good to see you again. I want to just add briefly a thought on what you have proposed, because I think maybe my bias is showing, but I do appreciate your effort to continue the funding beyond the Olympics. And I will, in addition to your excellent presentation on the value, I will add that from an athlete's perspective, we do understand that development of an athlete isn't something you can do just in a year or two ahead of Olympics, that it is long-term. And I will add also that the success of athletes raises our collective level of confidence for everything that Canada and Canadians can achieve. And so I just want to thank you very, very much for being here, and congratulate you, of course, for your successes, but thank you for being here today in your presentation. My question is specifically is for Dr. Casson. We had a very interesting presentation. We've had a number of really interesting presentations on a number of issues already, but we had representatives from the polytechnics a few days ago. And they raised a very important, I think, point and a question to be addressed, and maybe you can shed some light on it, and may put you on the spot a little bit. But it was the fact that money, as it is from the government and governments in this country, really focuses still to a much larger extent on pure research as opposed to applied research. And they had a number of examples of where the work of the polytechnics in terms of applied research, both within the institutions themselves, but also in cooperation with businesses and other participants. And there's some really wonderful success stories for them and for the country ultimately. But it really, their point was that the distinction, the level is out of proportion. Now, I appreciate your effort here in asking for more support for postdoc research fellows, and don't disagree with that. I think we're very supportive of seeing increased investment, and I share my colleague Mr. Mulcair's point about it's empty if it doesn't support the people. But can you shed a little bit of light on the differences in where we can see improvements or benefits from investment in pure research, basic research, as opposed to applied research?
Well, I'll give it a shot. Basic research is where new ideas come from and new knowledge comes from. Applied research, depending on how you define it, and there are no agreements on what applied research actually is. One would say that all basic research is applied research, or you could say the reverse. So applied research, if that's directed research to solve a particular problem, we support that, absolutely. And we would support investment in that. And certainly our granting councils, for example, NSERC, does support that as well. The important thing is to recognize that we don't want to restrict the focus unnecessarily of our researchers. If they choose to work on applied problems, that is appropriate. That's their decision. But we don't want to have the funds available be narrowed in any way.
Okay. So let me, if yes, please.
Further to what has just been said, it's important to understand that applied research is impossible without the pure research before it. It's virtually impossible. Therefore, to ask for balance between the two is particularly difficult because there's no such thing. You know, if you don't have pure research, you will not have applied research. And one of the fundamental problems we've had in this country, and we have made presentation to this effect in the past, is that compared to other countries, Canada industry has very low research endeavor. It is pharmacy, pharmaceutical industry being an exception, but generally speaking, we have a problem of industry translating pure research into innovation. That is the fundamental problem. It's not a question of balance, a question of who does what and why don't they do more.
Okay.
We're done? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hall-Finley. We'll go to Ms. Roy, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, am in somewhat of a conflict of interest because my son is a student, is a graduate student, and he actually earned a couple of scholarships. And the scholarship that did not come from the government was actually tax deductible, contrary to his government scholarship. Because in any case, he earned both of them just as well. It's a system that I find quite frustrating. And in his case, he spent a summer in Washington, and I'm not exactly sure that he would return to the United States. Actually, I'm pretty sure that he would because he's much better treated there than he is here. So, Mr. Williams, I was listening to you quite attentively because you were talking about intellectual property, and there's a phenomenon, a global phenomenon, that of counterfeit drugs. And in Europe, the problem of counterfeit drugs has become catastrophic. And we are not immune to that problem. So when you talk about intellectual property, do you think that the current regime would allow the government to take sufficient action with sufficient force to prevent the rise of counterfeit drugs so that we do not go through the same thing that is happening in France or in Germany? Answer. According to my information, the government is currently examining that very matter. I just do want to impress upon you that we have a very secure system here in Canada. And our regime has elements of checks and balances. But as we speak, we are discussing about how we can better protect our IP regime, because with the Internet and the supply chains in place, we must make sure that Canadians are properly protected. Can we do better? Can we do more? Well, we work in partnership with the government to protect ourselves against bad drugs, drugs that are not up to par. But can you say that right now, Canada is affected by that problem of counterfeit drugs? Perhaps not to the extent as it is in Europe, but what is the situation? Well, we are protected, and we have to make sure that we can protect ourselves against any future waves of counterfeit drugs. Can we do more? Certainly, but there are departments such as Health Canada and the RCMP which are looking into these matters. And Canada can't just ask itself what it can do alone, but it must look at what it can do with other parties to fight contraband products. It's not just a matter of protecting ourselves, it's a matter of cooperation with other countries. So what you're telling me is that you are currently examining at how we can defend ourselves, but we don't have any answers as to how we can actually fight the problem. Now, I'm not an expert, but these matters are in constant evolution. They are constantly changing. So we are investing all of our energies to tighten our rules and look at ways of better protecting ourselves. Now, perhaps at another occasion, I can speak with you one-to-one and elaborate and certainly convey any messages that need to be conveyed. Because it sounds like you would have to put together teams of investigators and go to great lengths to fight this problem. Yes, it's true, and we do have an association that works internationally. So I would be very pleased to work with you and talk with you in the weeks ahead. My next question is for Mr. Anderson. You only have 30 seconds remaining, Mr. Waugh. Oh. So the program that you would refer to in Quebec does still exist, and there is a tax credit in Quebec that reimburses up to 50% of the expenses. But it's not available to all SMEs. I think we need to further analyze that program.
We've just done a study on the cooperative investment plan in Quebec, which is available in French and in English on our website. And I'd be very happy to send you a copy of it, which is a detailed study. But effectively, it produces about some $30 million of new investment each year in terms of cooperatives in Quebec.
Okay, thank you. We'll go now. The final questioner will be Ms. Block for today, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you as well to all of the presenters. As a new member of Parliament, I'm finding this process very interesting, and I appreciated reading all of your submissions. Considering all of the hard work and dedication it takes to become an Olympic athlete, I was wondering if I could ask for unanimous consent of this committee to thank our Winter Olympic athletes and wish them the best of luck in the Winter Olympics to be held next year in Vancouver.
Make it unanimous.
I'm seeing unanimous consent. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Block.
Thank you. I do have a question. I was interested, and it's for Mr. Sanger, I was very interested in reading your submission last night and the suggestion of a $500 million fund to create 50,000 green jobs. Thought that was very interesting, and you expanded on it in your presentation, your written presentation, but not in your oral one here today. But the question I have for you is, in a letter to the Minister on October 11th, 2007, QP wrote, Canada's securities regulators have a dismal record. Canadians have been embarrassed that regulation and enforcement of securities crime in Canada is so weak. I also note that the Canadian Labour Congress has called for a national securities regulator. As you know, the Conservative government is moving in this direction. Is this still the position of QP, and would you agree that a Canadian securities regulator is essential in guaranteeing the investment and retirement security of Canadians?
I'm so happy that you read that letter. I was wondering. We had written to the finance minister on a couple of occasions about strengthening our securities regulation. We hadn't received any response. And I was very glad to see that there may be some moves in that area. I hope that it doesn't just go after the little people, the little, well, I mean, the relatively little people on that. In terms of a national securities regulator, our position is, if it is going to be effective, you can have a national organization that isn't effective, but it needs to be effective in different ways. And so I can't say yes on that, but hopefully, if it has stronger enforcement in a number of areas. Somebody who you may have heard of, Diane Urquhart, who has stood up for the rights of small investors and workers. Most workers have got most of their savings in pension funds and things like that. She told me that when she has cases, she first looks to see if there is a U.S. connection to this. She doesn't go to Canada. She looks to see, can we win this case in the United States? That's embarrassing. I am embarrassed as a Canadian to see white-collar criminals first being prosecuted in the United States and not in Canada first. I think that we should be doing much more of that. And there's been some steps announced so far, but many more things need to be done on this.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Block. I want to thank all the witnesses for their testimony here today, their responses to our questions. Certainly a very interesting session. We'll suspend for a couple minutes, and then we'll have the other witnesses come forward. I do want to say we do continue the tradition that Mr. Williams and Mr. Mulcair had of friendly hockey games. We play the Liberals every year. And Ms. Brison, the Liberals actually bring in ringers every year. So, you know, they can't be competitive on an evening level, so we would certainly welcome you on our team anytime. So thank you very much. We'll suspend. Okay, I call the second part of the meeting to order. Continuing our pre-budget consultations, we have with us another 6 organizations who are here for an hour and a half. We have, first of all, the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations. We have the Canadian Healthcare Association, the Canadian Teachers Federation, the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association, the Directors Guild of Canada, and we have the Grain Growers of Canada. I want to welcome you all here. You have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement, and then we will go to questions from the members of Parliament. So we'll start with the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations and work our way down.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would like to thank you and the members of the committee for inviting the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations here today. We're an alliance of 24 student associations representing 400,000 university and college students across Canada. Today we want to highlight why education spending in a time of austerity is a crucial investment. To begin, I'd like to provide some context by discussing the OECD's annual education report that was issued last week. Canadian university attainment has grown for 25 to 34-year-olds, but much more slowly than our peers. That places us 12th in the OECD and at the bottom of the G7 countries. So, Canada's key education investments were made nearly a generation ago, and we can't continue to coast if we really want to continue our country's knowledge advantage. Furthermore, our demographic changes are generating new challenges to Canada's economic growth. This makes advancements in innovation and productivity even more important than they are today. So by 2025, the number of persons that will be retiring from the workforce will exceed newcomers by over 34%. What CASA believes is that education investments is the best way to really combat this. It provides technical abilities and develops critical thinking skills crucial to the development and adoption of new ideas and technologies. The federal government chose to cut investment in education in the mid-90s to reduce the deficit. Due to these cuts, Canada faced a brain drain where essentially our graduates and our highly indebted researchers left to find opportunities elsewhere. What CASA believes is that we can't afford to take the easy road out of a deficit by cutting education spending now. Investing in education is an opportunity to build human infrastructure and essentially strengthen Canada's economic position. So what Spencer will be doing is going through the specifics of our pre-budget submission, but these are the considerations that went into our submission today.
All right, so I'll just be highlighting some of the key points. First is about the Canada Social Transfer. The federal government announced in Budget 2007 an $800 million envelope within the Canada Social Transfer for post-secondary education, but we continue to have what we would estimate to be about a $3 billion funding gap from cuts that were made in 1995 in real terms, not accounting for increased numbers of students in that time. We estimate the actual gap to be closer to about $3.5 billion. Additionally, there is no mandated federal reporting structure coupled to the Canada Social Transfer. Whether money is earmarked for PSE or not, the federal government is unable to inform taxpayers about how much funding is actually spent on colleges and universities, as opposed to other provincial and territorial initiatives. That is why we are asking for an increase of $800 million per year for the next 5 years, governed by agreements with the provinces to not reduce their post-secondary education spending. This dollar amount is to address both the funding gap that has accrued over the past 14 years and to place us in a better position to face the demographic crisis that Arthi was referring to. Secondly is the post-secondary student support program. We believe that Aboriginal funding should be a critical area for future investment because they hold so much potential for increased participation. About a third of Aboriginals are under 14 and will soon be at college and university age. Currently, only 3% of the First Nations population will have earned bachelor's degrees or higher, compared with 13% of the general population. In 2005, 23,000 First Nations and Inuit students were funded from the Post-Secondary Student Support Program, but that's down from 27,000 in 1996 when a 2% cap on program spending increases was put in place, forcing a small pot of funds to be spread among an increasing number of students. Furthermore, the structure of PSSSP prevents bands from being able to effectively run the program. INAC considers paying program coordinators to be a misuse of funds. Reserves with PSE coordinators can help young First Nations and Inuit navigate PSSSP and other programs such as the Canada Student Loans Program and increase the use of existing funds. CASA believes the 2% cap on increased spending for PSSSP should be removed and that programs funding should increase by 10 to 15% to allow band councils to legally hire and fund on-reserve program coordinators. Finally, I briefly want to highlight the student interest in funding the indirect cost of research. Every dollar that goes to funding the indirect cost of research is a dollar that need not be taken from the teaching and learning component of a university. The UK and European Union fund indirect costs in the range of 50 to 60%. Canada currently funds less than 25% of these costs, with the remainder carried by students through their tuition. Essentially, we believe the amount that students are subsidizing research in Canada should be reduced. In closing, our thanks again to the committee for allowing us to present before you today. We look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now go to the Canadian Healthcare Association, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much, committee. Canadian Healthcare Association has been a champion of publicly funded health system and the health system in general for almost 80 years. We're the only federation of provincial and territorial health associations and organizations in the country which represents the breadth of the health system and therefore we feel brings a uniquely important perspective to any discussion which concerns the health of the nation, financial or otherwise. I would, however, like to reassure the committee that we do appreciate the complex and delicate decisions facing you concerning the next federal budget. We get it. We're here today to suggest concrete and doable ways to address fiscal pressures on Canadians and the health system. There are solutions. I have 5 key premises, not all of which I will speak to. They are in the documentation. But I must mention health and the economy. Illness and poor health have a negative impact on tax revenue, on corporate profits and wage-based productivity, which in turn causes less money to be available to fund government initiatives such as health, education, housing, and other programs. This, too, we get. In fact, we are committed to the understanding that the health of the nation is driven by far more than the provision of medical services and must be nurtured through equal attention to other determinants of health, such as poverty, education, and employment. Second premise, health system funding. We know the days of large surpluses are gone, but funds for new health and social programs and broad tax reductions that will both reduce poverty and improve the health and social well-being of Canadians are needed even more during this recessionary period, and the 6% escalator must be protected. Third, tax credits. CHA believes that the recent non-refundable tax credits have not been effective in meeting the needs of Canadians who need tax relief and government programs the most. Using tax credits or tax expenditures as instruments of social policy is not appropriate. It marginalizes Canadians who do not have the financial ability to save or make use of these very credits. We do have solutions. 2 that I will speak to during this brief presentation: care for the caregivers and infrastructure. 23% of Canadians provided informal care to a family member or close friend with serious health problems. 41% had to use personal savings to survive during this time. If replaced by a paid caregiver, the economic value is estimated to be between $5.7 and $26 billion. We have 2 options to recommend to you. 1, a provision in the Canada and Quebec pension plans, similar to the provisions that currently exist for those who have taken time off from the workforce to raise children. A second option, transferring the compassionate care program from employment insurance so that individuals who are not eligible for EI, such as contract workers, part-time workers, still have the ability to draw on the fund. Our second recommendation for today has to do with infrastructure. We solicit your support for investment in this health infrastructure piece. Many health facilities are in serious need of renovation or replacement. Modern designs will inhibit spread of infectious disease and facilitate patient recovery. This isn't just about bricks and mortar. Access to infrastructure stimulus funds, the green infrastructure and eco-energy funds would allow facilities, community, acute care, all of the facilities to build or retrofit to green standards, providing a sustainable and safe environmental future. And if we really want to improve the quality, the efficiency and effectiveness of health care for the patients as well as enhance collaboration among health professionals, we need to support Canada Health Infoway in its mandate for electronic health records. Absolutely essential. My final thoughts, I haven't even touched on health human resources, but I can and would welcome the opportunity if we have questions. We've also focused on long-term care. We have a special policy brief that will be launched next Tuesday on facility-based long-term care with good recommendations that might assist you in your work. A healthy economy is created, sustained, and grown by healthy Canadians. These are turbulent and financially challenging times, but there are many effective ways to address fiscal pressures on Canadians and the health system. We welcome that opportunity to work with you to develop and implement these solutions. Thank you. Merci mille fois. Merci.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. We will now go to the Canadian Teachers Federation.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, everyone. My name is Mary Lou Donnelly, and I'm the president of the Canadian Teachers Federation. I have here beside me John Staple, who is our Deputy General Secretary of the CTF. The Federation is a national voice for teachers in Canada on education and related social issues. We represent upwards of 200,000 teachers across the country through 16 provincial and territorial teacher organizations. Our presentation and brief will focus on an issue that demands the immediate attention of the Canadian public and all levels of government, and that is child poverty. Over the past 2 years, we have taken on child poverty as our main focus on social justice issues at the Canadian Teachers Federation. In 1989, the House of Commons unanimously passed a resolution setting the goal to eliminate poverty among Canadian children by the year 2000. And here we are 20 years later, and the child poverty rate remains essentially at 1989 levels. Canada's after-tax child poverty rate appears stalled at just over 11%. Nearly 1 of every 9 Canadian children lives in poverty. Child and family poverty rates are at double digits in 5 out of 10 provinces in our country. 1 out of every 2 children living in a family that recently immigrated to Canada lives in poverty, and 1 in 2 Aboriginal children under the age of 6 who are not living in First Nations communities live in low-income family. There's been an 86% increase in the use of food banks since the 1989 unanimous House of Commons resolution to end child poverty. But what we see happening in this is that we have actually regressed in this area. In the same year, 1989, CTF issued a report that examined the impact of poverty on children, specifically how it affected the successes of children in elementary and secondary schools. The report concluded that children living in low-income conditions experience reduced motivation to learn, delayed cognitive development, lower achievement, less participation in extracurricular activities, lower career aspirations, interrupted school attendance, lower university attendance, an increased risk of illiteracy, and, of course, higher dropout rates. There's a well-established correlation between socioeconomic status and children's academic performance, and our brief makes reference to research supporting that contention. CTF has an extensive policy on children in poverty. It is based on the fundamental premise that all children, regardless of circumstances or family income, have the right to the full benefits of publicly funded education. And in supporting this, teachers and their organizations participate in the development of educational and public policies designed to reduce the incidence and impact of child poverty. Our policy stresses the importance of childcare and early intervention and the role of government in addressing that concern. Governments at all levels must undertake coordinated social and economic policies designed to eliminate child poverty and to assist those currently living in poverty. We know that teachers see the evidence of poverty in their classrooms year after year. They see it when students move and change schools frequently during the school year because the family does not have enough money to pay rent. They see it when students shrink from shame or lash out from anger because of the stigma of poverty. And they see it when students can't afford to buy books or go to the book fair or on school trips with the other kids because of poverty. We've called for a greater political will and commitment to a national poverty reduction strategy for Canada. Several provinces have taken or are planning to take coordinated action to address poverty. Newfoundland and Labrador and Quebec have implemented poverty reduction strategies. The federal government needs to build on these initiatives and create a national strategy that complements and supports provincial and territorial programs. In our brief, we make the following specific recommendations, among others, to the federal government: to raise the minimum wage, to expand the eligibility for employment insurance, and to put in place a universal child care system. It is interesting, I spent the day at the Conference Board of Canada, and they're actually coming out with a report on child poverty tomorrow, so it'll be interesting to see that. It's very timely. And they rate Canada on one of the lowest rates in the world on child poverty. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll now go to the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association.
Thank you. My name is Brenda Kenny. I'm the president of the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to present to the committee today. You have a more detailed brief from us, but I will look forward to answering any of your questions following this brief introduction. I'll begin by setting the context. The Canadian Energy Pipeline Association represents companies that transport over 97% of all the oil and natural gas produced and used in Canada. We operate over 100,000 kilometers of pipelines in North America, and over the next 15 years, to meet the needs of Canadians, we plan to double our collective assets by investing $43 billion in construction of new pipelines and other facilities. That number could grow to $85 billion if you include the Mackenzie and Alaska pipeline proposals. CEPA members will play a key role in implementing the large-scale carbon capture and storage projects, or CCS, as well. So I am making this presentation today because I know that our industry can be an active partner in stimulating the economy, provided that the government takes the necessary actions to ensure private sector investment in pipeline infrastructure in the short term. I'll make 3 suggestions that should result in significant capital investment. This will happen in a way that produces spending on manufactured goods, job creation, and an expanded network of pipelines, all at no cost to taxpayers. In brief, we need regulatory reform to facilitate the flow of stimulus spending. We need an industry-funded technology fund that would support downstream energy efficiency programs, and we need a tax-efficient mechanism to set aside monies needed to ensure that pipeline assets are retired in an environmentally and economically sound manner. With respect to economic stimulus, we at CEPA are concerned that the regulatory framework in Canada today is bogging down private sector's ability to inject financial stimulus and investments in the Canadian economy. The federal regulatory framework for pipelines in Canada has evolved over many years. It's been a layering on of new laws and regulations atop of existing ones, resulting in needless complexity. A simpler, more timely assessment and regulatory process would reduce costs, focus government resources on issues and outcomes, and make timelines more predictable, thereby encouraging investment, job creation, and spending on materials at a time when the demand is low and prices are favorable. The task of regulatory reform has already begun through the Major Projects Management Office, an initiative we wholeheartedly support. We applaud the government for implementing the office and backing it up with senior-level leadership. This budget cycle marks year 3 of 5 in a $30 billion spending commitment to the MPMO and key agencies in government. It's imperative that we not lose sight of the strategic importance of regulatory reform and ensure the government and industry and other stakeholders have a line of sight toward 2012 when the funding expires. We have been encouraged by small steps toward regulatory renewal. Earlier this year, I spoke to the Senate Energy, Environment and Natural Resources Committee on changes being made to the Navigable Waters Act. Change is occurring, but we believe that we must continue to partner with government to build a robust, credible, clear, modern, and results-oriented regulatory system that promotes environmental best practice in Canada. I turn now to the issue of pipeline abandonment. As an industry, pipeline companies have a long history of positive results on environmental protection. Effective financial planning and regulation spans the full life of a project right through to the end of its use, and the pipeline industry has advocated for several years a tax-efficient environmental trust option that would afford a variety of opportunities to save better and sooner. And this now I turn to you in response to a recent decision by the National Energy Board asking us to begin to implement these sorts of measures. We look to you for your assistance. Finally, and this is in more detail in the brief, and I would be happy to respond to questions, we are asking for an industry-funded technology fund as a part of Canada's climate change strategy, the money of which would go toward energy efficiency programs downstream, thereby on a full value chain level actually achieve emission reductions for all of us. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll go now to the Directors Guild of Canada, please.
Mr. Chairman, honourable members of the Standing Committee on Finance, my name is Brian Antony, and I'm the National Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Directors Guild of Canada. Je voudrais vous remercier pour cette occasion fort appréciée.
I would like to thank you for this very welcome opportunity of appearing before you in the course of your current pre-budget consultative hearings. You have all had the chance to consider the submission we forwarded to you in August, so I will keep my opening remarks brief, and I will then be very happy to respond to any questions that you may later have.
National Labour Organization, which represents over 3,800 key creative and logistical personnel in 47 occupational categories in the film, television, and new media industry. Our sector is one that annually contributes some $5 billion of economic activity and generates over 131,000 jobs. We have come a long way as an industry in recent decades, and this growth and development is due in great measure to the leadership manifested by successive federal governments and their commitment to encouraging a vibrant film, television, and digital media industry in Canada. We've reached a plateau, however, and if the federal government is to continue to build on its investment, and if we are to overcome our current problems and move forward, a renewed commitment is required. People can be forgiven for believing that ours is a glamorous, even frivolous industry, for that is how it is often portrayed in the media, and I would refer you to the media coverage of all of the social activities surrounding the current Toronto International Film Festival. But the reality of life on the set or in the studio lies a very, very long way from red carpets, black ties, and ball gowns. Our members work in real jobs in an industry that manufactures real products, products that have cultural value, to be sure, but have material, tangible, economic value as well. Working in our industry is difficult at the best of times, and these are by no means the best of times. When there is work, the hours are long, and the work hard. All too often, however, our members are not working. As one of my colleagues says when he lectures young students in film studies programs, this will probably be the best part-time job you'll ever have. Nationally speaking, about half the production activity that takes place in Canada is domestic, and half service productions, by far and away most of which are American. Here in Ontario, the split is roughly 60% Canadian and 40% foreign, but in British Columbia, by contrast, over 80% of activity there is U.S.-based. Given this, when American activity drops, we are vulnerable. Last year was a terrible year. A rising Canadian dollar scared away many service productions, and I noticed it was trading at the end of the day just below 94 cents. A protracted writer's strike in the U.S. drove down production activity. State tax credits and other incentives kept many U.S. productions at home, and later in the year, the global economy fell off the cliff. This economic downturn had a significant impact on Canadian film and television production as well, so we were hit with a real double whammy. On remarque une certaine amélioration cette année, du moins dans certaines...
There's some improvement this year in some regions of this country, but things can certainly be better. The situation must improve considerably so that our industry can work at full capacity and make a greater contribution in economic, employment, and cultural terms.
Pre-budget deliberations come in. Our industry is a key part of the creative economy, the economy of the future. And if our industry is to thrive, to flourish, we need the stability and predictability the renewed and enhanced commitment on the part of the federal government would provide us. We have therefore placed 3 recommendations before you in our written submission, and we hope that you will be able to endorse them and recommend them to the Minister of Finance for inclusion in the 2010 federal budget. These are the 3 recommendations. 1, that the Government of Canada enhance all federal programs of direct support to this industry. 2, that it enhance its indirect support similarly by expanding the federal tax credit program as Quebec and Ontario have recently done. And 3, recognizing that there should be a greater public-private sector partnership that a powerful tax incentive be created to encourage significant private investment in film, television, and new media production in Canada. If implemented, these measures would allow our industry to grow and develop and play an even greater role in providing meaningful employment, in contributing to the economy and the fisc, and in serving Canadian audiences. We understand the current economic and fiscal constraints at play, but bad times are the best times to plan for good times. Our industry is a vital part of the creative economy, the economy of the future, as I have said, and your support for our recommendations today will help us contribute to the good times of tomorrow. Monsieur le Président, membres du comité, je tiens à vous remercier pour cette occasion.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I would like to thank you for this opportunity of appearing before you today and for what we hope will be your favorable consideration of our recommendations.
The Grain Growers of Canada, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, honourable members, fellow guests. I will be sharing my time with Sherry, who's sitting next to me, so if the person running the mics could just keep an eye out for us. My name is Richard Phillips. I'm a farmer, and I'm with the Grain Growers of Canada. With me today from one of the members of the Grain Growers of Canada is Sherry Stridehorst. She's also a farmer, and she is with the Alberta Pulse Growers. If there is one thing that unites the 80,000 farmers of the Grain Growers of Canada from coast to coast, it's the issue of more funding for public research. In Canada, approximately 3/4 of the farmland is planted to crops developed by public sector plant breeders. The private sector does invest in corn, soybeans, and canola, but for 5 of Canada's 6 largest crops, 98% of the research is publicly funded. In the last 15 years, federal contributions to Ag Canada's research branch have been largely stagnant with no increases for inflation. In 2009 dollars, this means that funding has dropped from $458 million to $280 million today, nearly a 50% cut. The number of frontline scientists has dropped by more than 10% in just the last couple of years. Our request to you today is twofold. First, we are asking for a doubling of A-based funding to Ag Canada. This would cost $280 million phased in over 10 years, or approximately $28 million per year. This will allow Ag Canada to upgrade labs and equipment, bring on new staff, and help ensure proper succession plans for continuity of corporate memory. So, for example, if there's a plant pathologist retiring who's been studying crop diseases, it's really critical that the new person coming in, there's some overlap, so there's a transfer of that knowledge as to what that person's been working on. Sherry?
I'd like to share with you 2 success stories from public breeding. Now, almost 100% of the small red, black, and Great Northern beans grown in southern Alberta were developed by Ag Canada's bean breeding program. These varieties have market demand, they incorporate disease resistance, they're high quality, but most importantly, these varieties have improved farmers' bottom lines. Public research has also been integral to the success in Canadian farmers, with the example of a wheat variety that was developed by Ag Canada scientists, and this variety was AC Berry, and it was planted on 50 million acres of Canadian farmland over the last 10 years. The gross value of this wheat was $1 billion, and it contributed over $540 million in incremental farm gate revenue because of its improved yield and disease resistance.
So, looking ahead, there are a number of key areas that Canadian farmers and consumers want work done on. Traits like drought tolerance on the southern prairies, cold tolerance in the northern prairies and in the corn belts, disease resistance. I'm sure some of you have heard of UG99. It's a rust that's threatening the world's wheat supply. Fusarium. Fusarium affects a lot of wheat across Canada, primarily in Ontario and Atlantic Canada and the Red River Valley. Insect resistance, which would reduce the use of pesticides, whether it's flea beetles in canola or wheat midge in wheat. Improved utilization of nitrogen, and I know in a lot of places you guys are aware there's a lot of concern over nitrogen fertilizers running off into water supplies, and so if we can improve the plant breeding, then we don't need as many fertilizers. And healthier food, for example, the availability of iron into our diets through peas and beans. There's tremendous potential to make our food healthier for consumers. For example, the reduction in diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity, and I think some of you are probably aware of some of the canolas with the omega-3s and things like that, and the removal of trans fats from diet. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And Sherry?
So the second thing that we're asking for is an incentive to spur the use of certified seed. Now, the sale of certified seed is what provides royalties back to plant breeders, both in the public and in the private sector. So crops like peas, wheat, barley, and oats have traditionally seen very low use of certified seed, and therefore there has been very little interest in the private sector to invest there because their return on investment isn't there. So what we want to do is increase the use of certified seed, and this will directly lead to increased private sector investments in plant breeding. We'd like to recommend that the next budget contain a tax credit to encourage farmers to buy certified seed on a regular basis. So to sum up our requests, we are looking for $280 million over the next 10 years to be invested in A-based funding at Ag Canada, and secondly, that a tax credit or another incentive program be implemented to encourage the use of certified seed. Thank you for this opportunity, and we look forward to any questions you would have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll go to questions from members. We'll start with Mr. Pachetti, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for appearing. It seems easy for you guys because you only have one subject and you only have one thing to worry about. We just had 6 presentations and 6 briefs to go through. And it took, what, 28 minutes or 30 minutes for you guys to do the presentation. So bear with me. I have a whole bunch of questions. I'm going to try and get them in. Mr. Keys, your group is asking for $800 million, and I think it's over 5 years. And I don't have a problem with the ask, but one of the items that the group has been asking for the past several years is for the government to separate the post-secondary amount in the social transfer payments. We don't seem to be able to get anywhere with that. So it's kind of tough to ask for another $800 million when we don't know where the money presently is going, because you just said it yourself, the $800 million that was invested last year, we're still not sure if the money was properly invested. Mm-hmm. Am I correct in
yes, comments? You'd be correct. There's no accountability framework right now.
So we should probably be asking that there be disclosure in the social transfer payments between post-secondary and other payments, correct?
Yes, and that's included in my remarks.
Okay, but that should be the priority. That should be the first priority before we should be asking for money.
I think that you would have to recognize that there have been substantial hits to endowments across the country, some who have gone down by 30% or more. I think you have to recognize that there is the oncoming demographic difficulties that we need to prepare for. So I'd say you'd have to be working on both at the same time. I don't think you can easily say one before the other.
Okay. The other point is also in how we account for how much money has been put towards post-secondary, because there was money put towards research chairs, independent research councils, and things like that. So there's always a dispute as to how much money was really cut in the earlier years. So what is your comment for that? So should there be cuts in the other items?
No, I would not suggest that there should be cuts in the other areas, but I do think, though, it's important to increase money through this envelope, primarily because that is money that can go to operational spending. And the importance of that is that when a university is essentially forced to go down a particular path because there's an envelope of money for that, say it's research or building research infrastructure, et cetera, that is limiting in the kinds of
just because it's more direct. So I like the money that goes into research. It's more direct, and we can account for it a little bit better. Ms. Fralick, just quickly, your brief was quite detailed, but you spoke about the compassionate care benefits, and it should be funded through EI. Would that require any reform, or is it's not completely clear, because you're saying you can just achieve the availability through the EI fund, but how would you see that? Because there already is an aspect in there, is there not?
We're suggesting, in fact, that it be moved out of EI, that it gets lost. It's not long enough and it's not comprehensive enough, and that it should be a standalone program similar to what has been done. My colleague, by the way, and I was rude in not introducing her earlier, Denise Desautels, who's our Director of Policy and Communications. But it's the maternity.
There are 2 aspects in that what we do is that we fund people to take care of individuals at the beginning of life. We don't fund them to take care of people at the end of life. And so we're saying the compassionate care program is only 8 weeks long. It's not nearly long enough.
I agree, but what would your suggestion be?
Create a separate program. Move the funding that was allotted to the compassionate care program and move it out into a separate program so that individuals who might not be eligible for EI could participate in that program, because we've indicated.
How would they be eligible if they're not paying into the program? That's the problem we're having with EI now, and there's not enough people qualifying. So we're going to just create another level of government or another.
You would create a separate program in much the same way that the European governments have done so. You have to allow for the fact that a large number of individuals who are taking care of people at the end of life are either working part-time or they're on contract or they're self-employed, so they don't have the ability to draw from that fund, yet they're suffering.
I'm not disputing the cause, because I agree with you. 8 weeks is not enough. That's not what I'm disputing. It's just the mechanism on how we can deliver the service so it doesn't go into the hands of the bureaucracy, but it goes into the hands of the people that need it. So if you can provide us with some details, I'd love to see it, and maybe we can recommend it. Ms. Donnelly. We all visit schools, and I visit schools regularly in my riding, and the biggest shame, especially coming from an urban riding, is that the teachers complain all the time that kids go to school with hungry. Now, there's a lot of programs trying to feed the kids, and it's a huge problem. I mean, anybody that's visited a school, an urban school, knows that there's a problem. And in speaking to the teachers, I don't think there's any teacher that I haven't spoken to that doesn't tell you that they actually take money out of their own pocket to provide kids with some food or some type of food. My question is how do we fix that? Because I know you say in your statement that we should probably increase the amount of child tax allowances and other kinds of monies. But the problem that I'm seeing is that the parents don't provide. They may have the money, but they use it for their own purposes and don't provide the adequate care for those children going to school. That's what I've seen.
I think it's not just about food. It's not just about feeding the children. It's what we're looking at is a whole national strategy on the reduction of poverty. Poverty is also a mindset. And with that comes values. And so we've done all kinds of things in the schools and social programs to try and feed the kids. We feed them in the morning, we feed them at lunch, and we feed them after school. And you're absolutely right, responsibility does fall on the parents at some point, but it's that whole education to the parents that would be encompassed in that national strategy on the reduction of poverty. So it's not just about food, it's
No, I understand it's not about food. I mean, it's like we have a program in my riding where we help the students acquire supplies at a fraction of the price that they would normally purchase. The problem is, like you said, is to get the parents involved and to educate the parents as well.
Just very brief response, Ms. Donnelly.
Mr. Anthony?
No, your time is sort of done. Unless, Ms. Donnelly, did you want to offer a final 10-second response?
Just to say that we're looking at a national strategy that encompasses much more than school supplies and food. It's much more involved than that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pachetti. We'll go Mr. Laforêt, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, witnesses. My first question, or comment if it were, is for Ms. Donnelly from the Canadian Teachers Federation. Too often we hear comments about teachers and a certain lack of professionalism because all they think about is their vacation. And in fact, I think this isn't true. When teachers groups such as yourselves come and make demands to help the children that you are responsible for, I think it is evidence of your professionalism. And to fight child poverty is something that is highly honorable. I'm just making that comment because for a very long time I myself was an educator. And I taught children who had developmental problems. And at the time, I was able to make the connection, the very strong connection between the social economic status or the social economic situation a child lived in and their development potential. This was something that I had observed over many years, and I agree with you. I think this is a major problem. However, when you say that, and this is what I want to ask my question about, don't you think that you're stuck in somewhat of a vicious circle? This vicious circle being one that the fewer resources we get, the more poor we are, the less well a student will perform, and the greater difficulty a student will have to break that vicious cycle. What is your experience? Thank you for the question.
Very few teachers who are in it for the vacation. Just up front, I'd like to say that. But in terms of that vicious circle of which you speak, it is there, and that's one of the reasons why we keep advocating for money to be put, funding, resources, materials to be put into education, because it's an investment. We look at education as an investment in our country, and so we know from the teaching profession that we need to have those resources in the classroom, and that certainly will help those children. If it's not helping their parents' generation, at least it can help them succeed better in life and go on to post-secondary education, or at least get a degree, because we're talking about dropout rates as well that are connected to socioeconomic also. So we're always vying for dollars in education all across the country, but we hope that people will see it, that governments will certainly see it as an investment, and we continue to advocate for that.
Je vous remercie. Question peut-être pour Madame.
Thank you. Perhaps a question for Ms. Sharma and Mr. Keys. Now, when you are calling for investments of $800 million over the next 5 years, ultimately, isn't this related? Doesn't this tie back to the cutbacks made to post-secondary education by the Liberal government during the 1990s? That additional investment, would it not be used to make up for a huge shortfall in the university sector and in research, so that you can actually enable students to access post-secondary education?
I agree with you. It's really to make up for the cuts that were made in the early 90s. So it's not like it's additional money, it's just putting the system back to where it should be. Essentially, CAS is scared, and we met with a bunch of students yesterday, that the burden is going to fall on the student. With endowment funds being cut and students not being able to find jobs this summer, a lot of that burden will fall upon students. So again, it's just to get the system back to where it was.
Ouais, ça va, merci.
Thank you. Ms. Freilich, of the suggestions you make respecting our healthcare system on behalf of the Canadian Healthcare Association, you talk about amending the Canada Pension Plan and the Quebec Pension Plan. Could you please elaborate on why you think that?
Moving forward, we're not sure, frankly, which might be the best. That's going to require more technical expertise than probably anyone in this room can bring to the table. But we feel strongly that the issue has to be addressed and want to come forward with some opportunities to do that. One of the concerns with both the CPP and the QPP is that it has limitations for this particular circumstance, with the home care, taking care of the elderly, as my colleague was describing earlier. And basically, we're looking for options. I'm not sure if that answers why this option. These are the two that my members have suggested may be the most workable. There is precedent in place. It's a matter of applying a known solution to an emerging situation. Denise, if you want to add anything?
No, just to say that we've done it with averaging for families who are bringing up young children, and it should be possible to do the same for individuals who take time off to take care of either a parent who can't get into a long-term care facility. It's going to take a year and they have to take time off work to do that. They should be able to have this averaging so that eventually their CPP amount that they receive is increased because they've got rid of that year or two in which they had no income or had a lower income.
Okay. Merci. Merci, Monsieur Laforêt. We'll go to Mr. Wallace, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you everyone for coming and hanging until later in the early evening here. My first question is for the Grain Growers of Canada, and I represent an urban area, and so I don't deal a lot with agricultural issues. Try not to, anyways. But my question is, based on what you've presented today, give me your view, your organization's view of what is the role of the federal government as it relates to agriculture. Based on what you said today, you were looking for a tax incentive for somebody to buy seeds and some research money. But I hear other things from other agricultural organizations and farmers, and I just want to know what your organization's view is.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I would say the base philosophy of the roughly 80,000 farmers that belong to the grain growers is that the government does not owe farmers a living. You know what? We have to go out there as farmers and make business decisions and operate and use the knowledge, skills, and abilities that God's given us, so to speak. What the government does owe us, though, is a policy environment in which we can operate fairly. Some issues are simply beyond farmers' controls. For example, international trade rules or bilaterals. There's a role for governments to go out and negotiate those on our behalf, provide the environment where we have the market access and can make the trade and therefore make a living from what we do. Another area, though, would be in public research. And there are certain areas of research, and primarily base agronomic research, where there's no investment, there's no incentive for the private sector to invest because there's no ability to get any return back. So it could be as simple as some of the smaller diseases, some of the smaller pests. There's areas where the private sector will never put money into. Okay. And that's why there's a role for the public sector to step in there. But you know what, as farmers, we have checkoffs set up. It's not like we expect the government to do even that for us. We have lots of checkoffs. There's the Western Grains Research Foundation. There's all kinds of organizations. Lots of farmers take checkoffs when we sell grain at the elevator. We pay so much money into a research fund. So we're willing to be your partners, but we do need you to help.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then Mr. Anthony, thank you for coming today. I'm interested in recommendation number 2 on your pre- and post-production costs. Can you give me an example of what you're talking about?
Yes, the tax credit, federal tax credit regime is limited to labor costs at the moment. What we would like to see the federal government do is to follow the example of Ontario and Quebec, which is to include other legitimate costs as well, the cost of equipment rental and so on, so that you have a more holistic approach, and also extend not just from simple production but into the pre-production and post-production phases, so that you have a very holistic approach to production activity.
I don't know if you missed, on a percentage basis, is that a 20% increase in that tax credit, or is that, do those costs, when you compare it to labor, is that labor 80% of your costs and 20% other, or is it 50-50? What's the ratio?
Well, the Ontario government hasn't provided all the detail yet. I think they're still sorting it out. I think in the case of Quebec, it's sort of doubling the eligible costs, which is welcome news. Now, the provincial tax credit regimes work on the assumption, and they monitor this closely, that the economic and employment activity that is generated through their tax credit regimes is returned to their fisc.
Okay.
So I think they work on the assumption that it's a wash, and when it proves not to be, they start to become concerned. Okay. But in fact, Ontario and Quebec, in recognition of the fact that my industry is a really powerful economic engine, have taken that major step forward.
Okay. I have a question for Ms. Donnelly. I looked through your recommendations, and you know, minimum wage is provincial, which is fine. Employment insurance, we've talked about some changes and improvements to that. Social housing, I don't disagree with you on that. There has been some major investment in social housing, including in my riding, which the region of Halton has just made some big announcements about. I agree on the improved accessibility and affordability of post-secondary education, and we had a couple of different programs for students to apply for grants and so on. We've amalgamated all that. I think it was too much bureaucracy. I totally agree with you there. My one question, though, is you have restrictions on growth for-profit corporate childcare. What do you mean by restrictions, and can you example why you would want to restrict growth of childcare?
We're talking about for-profit.
No, I know, but I'm asking you, what restrictions are you looking for?
Well, we're looking at public child care for people so that...
No, but you've got restrictions on growth of for-profit corporate. Tell me what restrictions you think the federal government should do.
I'm going to turn to my colleague.
Good pass. Mr. Stable.
I think what we want to try to do is to avoid the mistakes that we saw happening in Australia and in parts of the United States, where what we call big box corporate child care organizations that had as its goal primarily the generation of profit, and to a lesser degree the offering of quality child care and early learning interventions. Okay,
so we only have a minute here. So what is the restriction?
What we're talking about in restrictions then is to ensure that the aspects of quality, the aspects of affordability are not lost in the rush to gain profit.
So if they have a provincial inspector of a for-profit site that shows that the quality is there, you have no issue with it?
I think that will go a long way towards resolving the situation.
Okay, thank you very much. Do I have more time? I'm going to pass the minute. Kelly had a question, so she...
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming. I want to pick up where Mr. Wallace has sort of left off. In your submission under federal government responsibilities, you mentioned that without government initiatives such as the universal child care benefit, that family poverty would likely be 10% higher. And considering this program is a parent knows best approach to reducing poverty and building on what we've just been talking about in terms of child care and wanting to ensure there's quality child care being provided, have you contemplated any other options similar to the universal child care benefit?
Yeah, just very briefly, please. That's to Ms. Donnelly. Or Mr. Staple, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think our view of a universal child care system in the way that it's described in this report and the way that we would envision it is not is not the current $100 a month system that we have now with child tax credits. We don't believe that system works effectively. We don't believe the money gets to where it needs to get, and we believe it does not generate enough child care spaces across the country in the fashion that we had hoped it would. So our concept is completely different from the current context in which we're operating.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Staple. Thank you, Ms. Block. We'll go Mr. Martin. You have 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of those who gave presentations. I'm not a regular member of this committee, so if you'll forgive me making some general observations first and then some questions. I'm taken by, well, I'm heartened actually by the theme of a couple of the presentations regarding calling for a war on poverty, on a national strategy. 52% of all the children in my riding live below the poverty line. It must be one of the highest in the country. And it just strikes me that we're doing something fundamentally wrong in the redistribution of wealth in this country if we're seeing the incidence of child poverty rise, when other countries of the world have shown us that it's possible. Some of the Scandinavian countries, the incidence of child poverty is 0. So it leads me to believe that there are things that we could be doing if we set our mind to it. If we set goals for the reduction of child poverty the way we set goals for the reduction of the deficit throughout the 1990s, we may have lived up to Ed Broadbent's motion that was unanimously passed in the House of Commons to eradicate child poverty by the year 2000. I mean, I'm heartened, as I say, by those of you that have brought this to the attention of the Finance Committee, because it doesn't get discussed anywhere in Parliament or in the government to my knowledge. I mean, except for all of us of goodwill would like to see less child poverty, there is no concerted, stated goal or strategy that we can measure any progress on that file by. So I want to thank you for that, and I would welcome any comments you might have in that regard. But perhaps I'll lay out the second issue first and then let the witnesses talk about it. I'm interested in the certified seed comment you made. I represent the area that has the Grain Institute in downtown Winnipeg, so I'm very interested in grain research and the good work they do. But are you saying, I know that Canada is the country that's blocking the ban on the Terminator gene, the suicide seed, which would, seeds that can't reproduce. So the farmer has to go back to the Monsanto, whoever owns the license on that seed. Some of us have a problem with patenting life or putting a patent on living things and denying the farmer the ability to replant their own crop. Is the certified seed issue the same as the Terminator gene issue, or am I confused here?
I guess it is a very different issue. That's a technology that definitely our farmers do not want. They do not want to have seeds that, there's just something unnatural about that.
It's affront to nature, if you ask me.
Right, but we need to create a policy environment where companies do want to invest in legitimate research that is going to help farmers. So, for example, if there's a fusarium disease of wheat, that the private sector has the resources to build that into our varieties, but that there's no return on investment for them to do that, given that farmers just don't have that incentive to buy new seed with that. So if that seed is there, farmers will gladly pay a premium to get that and reinvest back in that company that is making that investment.
Yeah, and that can be a public company or a private company, like even universities. If there's certified seed sold that the universities have developed, then the royalties come back to the university and they can do more research. And so we're trying to find a way to just encourage, a carrot, not a stick, just a carrot, to encourage more farmers to use the certified seed, so the royalties would go back to the universities, to Ag Canada, or to the private, whoever developed those varieties.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's interesting. If there's a moment left, Mr. Chair?
Got 3 minutes, actually. So
I would welcome any input or comments on the original point
comments
that I raised.
On the child poverty issue?
From those who raised child poverty, anyone interested in comment, I guess.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Martin. Child poverty is something that teachers have seen in front of them forever. And I'm glad that you pointed out that it's something that is not talked about, because that's what we've identified, that there's not the political will there in territorial provincial governments or the federal government, and that's why we're pushing this. That's what we'd like to see. We'd like to see the governments working together on this, because we recognize that it can't be fixed perhaps by one province or one small jurisdiction, and there really needs to be a concerted effort on that. And as part of that national strategy, the reduction of poverty, we'd like to see early intervention programs and education for parents, and high quality daycare and early education programs for children. When we talk about feeding children breakfast, that's a wonderful thing to do, and I'm not going to take away from that, but it is a Band-Aid solution. That's not battling poverty. That's keeping their tummies full for the day, so that they can stay in school and learn for that particular day. But it's much, much grander than that, and we need to change the political will at all levels of government.
Okay, I had Ms. Freilich. Did you want to comment?
Thank you, and thank you for that opportunity to emphasize the points that we brought out. We know we represent health, and health is almost a dirty word these days, because we understand how many resources it takes from this country, even though it's a value-based decision we all make. But there are some phrases we don't hear nearly enough when we talk about health, and they are determinants of health, along with prevention and promotion. And this whole issue of poverty, child poverty, can I bring Aboriginal health into the table in the discussion as well? That is another whole layer of complexity to child poverty. So the more we can speak those words and collectively come up with some solutions, we'd welcome those further discussions.
wonder if we shouldn't be keeping in mind the real cost of having a permanent underclass as opposed to having more people as productive members of the workforce, etc. It just strikes me sitting here. I'm not a member of this committee, but we live in the richest and most powerful civilization in the history of the world, and we can't provide for the basic needs of our families to flourish. There's something wrong with the redistribution of wealth system that this committee is supposed to be commenting on.
Our brief does speak to that issue and the statistics behind that gap between the very wealthy and the very poor, and the impact that has on the overall economy, the health of a nation, basically.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Mr. Martin, we'll go to Mr. McKay, please, for 5 minutes.
Ms. Freilich, tax cuts and targeted tax expenditures are not appropriate measures. I take it the thrust of that point is that tax measures and targeted credits and things of that nature are entirely useless if your income is pretty low.
Exactly. I mean, I'm a former dancer and love the idea of ballet classes or soccer schools and coaching, whatever, but those who need the breaks the most cannot benefit from it. It's not that they're bad, but they're not the solution to the issue we've just been talking about.
Yeah, so if you're affluent and have an illness, that's good. You can use the tax credit, but if you're not,
it speaks to the health issue, because the more active we get our children and ourselves, the greater impact on, again, the health of the nation. But as an effort in addressing the needs of the most vulnerable who really need our help, it's not effective.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Anthony, the Guild recommends a federal tax regime that be expended forward, backward to make eligible appropriate pre-production and post-production costs that are broadened to include relevant non-labor costs. Could you give me a bit of an idea of what that means?
Sure. At the moment, in terms of the federal tax credit program, you can claim labor costs for tax credit purposes. But you cannot claim other non-labor costs such as equipment rental and studio rental and so on. Ontario and Quebec, or I should say Quebec and Ontario following Quebec's example, have moved to what we call an all-spend eligibility regime, whereby all of your eligible costs, not just your labor costs, but your other costs, are eligible for consideration for tax credit purposes. And we feel that if the federal government were to follow that example, we could have a sort of a truly national approach, assuming other provinces will move in that direction, a truly national approach to making all of the costs associated with film, television, and digital media production.
What was the original rationale to limit it to labor costs?
Well, I'm not certain. It goes back into the mists of time. As you know, back in the early days of federal involvement in encouraging film and television production, there was a 100% capital cost allowance program that goes back into the 70s, and that generated a whole lot of film and television productions that...
Oh, bogus stuff.
Yeah. And so they closed that, they reduced it to 50%, and then they wound it up and they replaced it with the labor cost tax credit. But I think the feeling was that it's putting our people to work. But the costs associated with film and television production are much more complex and broader and more broadly based than simple labor.
So is an attempt to eliminate abuse. Thank you. My final question is sort of similar to Mr. Martin's question with respect to this certified tax seed incentive. And I guess to cut to the chase, would a certified tax incentive to the farmer effectively be paying for the research costs of private companies?
Well, the tax credit would go directly to the farmer. Mm-hmm. But, and that would be an incentive to do it. Right now, like say wheat, for example, wheat acres, about 18% of the wheat acreage seeded is just a certified seed. The other farmers, they save their seed from the previous year, they clean it up and they replant it again. But what we're trying to encourage is both if we have more public sector investment, we also want the private sector to invest more in some of these crops as well. And so that's what we're trying to get at. We're not sure if there was a suggestion of another mechanism to spur that sort of investment. We'd certainly be open to that.
It is a bit incongruous that somehow or another the taxpayer of Canada ends up giving a credit directly to the farmer in this particular case, so that a company that has a licensing regime on a particular seed can, in effect, sell more seed.
Yes, but that could very well also be the university, or could be Agriculture Canada, and through that without the certified seed, without farmers buying that seed, there is no money goes back.
Well, would it be appropriate to restrict the credit to purchases from non-private sources?
Well, no, I don't think we'd want to differentiate that. I think there's a role to play. Even in crops like canola, for example, where there's a huge amount of private sector investment, there still is a lot of public sector investment too. There's areas where the public does research that it simply will never be done by the private sector. It could be rotations, for example, pulse crops. If you add inoculant to them, they actually create nitrogen, put it in the soil, so then the farmer doesn't even have to buy nitrogen the next year. Like something like that. Well, the fertilizer companies and chemical companies would never, seed companies, they would never invest in that research. It's actually just pure agronomic research that's good for farmers.
Okay.
And we just need some way to have money going back from farmers. We're willing to pay these. We're willing to pay the royalties to help fund in partnership with government.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McKay. We'll go Monsieur Roy.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My next question is for Ms. Donnelly. Very recently, I think about 5 or 6 months ago, a report was published by a Canadian province ministry. It had carried out an audit, a survey rather, and it was discovered that more than 50% of adults living in that particular province could be considered as illiterate. In fact, they were functional illiterate. In fact, the rate was higher than 50% according to that provincial department of this unnamed province. Now, I don't know what the statistics are in Quebec, but it is clear that there is a very high proportion of Canadians who can be defined as functional illiterate people. There are people who are unable to simply understand what they read. And right now, our young graduates, young people, could be considered as functional illiterate people. So in such a position, it's very difficult to enter post-secondary education. It is very difficult to obtain information. It's very difficult to break through the labor market. And it can even call upon harassment, and it makes people poor. So since then, there has been an idea of adult literacy programs to provide people with the opportunity to return to school on a part-time basis during evenings and learn how to actually read and understand what they read. So I have a problem when you talk about the educational system, because how is it that we have an educational system that is supposedly doing well, but there are people who get out of that system and are illiterate? According to the education department of the province that I will not name, said that more than 1 out of 2 adults was illiterate. And they had to leave their region, and they had to move away. And in fact, a Senate committee recently published a report that stated that the rate of illiteracy in rural areas is very high and quite appalling given our educational system. I'm just appalled to learn that there are so many illiterate people. How is that? How can you explain that?
Societal problems. The survey, and I can't, I mean, I can't explain every single one of those, but I can say that we do have a good education system in Canada, and we are graduating very well-educated people. At the same time, we have a very high dropout rate in the lower socioeconomic, and that could apply to, they could be encompassed in those adults who are illiterate. We have lots of issues and challenges in education. What we have discovered is that everybody doesn't learn the same way, and everybody doesn't come to school with the same the same type of academic motivation or capabilities. And so we've learned that over the last number of years in education, and certainly over the last 30 years we have seen huge changes in education, in the way we teach, in the way we know students learn, in our resources, in the materials that we provide, things like that. So the survey that was done, and I was aware of that survey, but I also question what is the age range when they talk about adults. What is the age range? Is it new graduates? Is it older people who were through the system 50 years ago? Is it rural? Pardon?
18 ans et plus.
18 ans.
18 ans et plus.
They were 18 years of age or older. They had carried out the survey among adults who were at least 18 years of age, but I'm not going to name the province.
But no, we certainly do have a good education system in Canada, but we still have challenges. And that is, once again, I come back to that underfunded system that we have. Right now what we're battling is class size and class composition, because we know we can't handle all of the children who come in front of us, and so we have to get the class sizes down, and the class composition has huge implications in what you can do with classes. And so we've learned that over the years, and it's once again why we keep advocating for, lobbying for, education is an investment. Put your money into education, and it's not just money, it's the resources as well, so that everybody who comes out is literate and stays in school and graduates and becomes literate.
Thank you. Merci. We'll go to Mr. Cannon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses this afternoon. And I just wanted to comment and follow up Mr. Martin. I'm a guest of this committee as well. I sit on a Human Resource Committee. We've been studying the issue of poverty for over 6 months, so it is a very serious issue and a concern for our government, and I think everybody in this room and within the House, that the fact that I have a sister-in-law that's a teacher and friends that I spend quite a bit of time with in the schools, and know firsthand some of the stories that I've heard and seen really are saddened to hear, and we want to do all we can. And we know the last budget we doubled the tax relief within our working income tax budget, or the working income tax benefit, and also trying to help with other incentives to try to encourage not only with individuals for training, but that are unemployed, to give them the skill set so they can continue to provide the benefits that are required to have a healthy life. The other aspect of, we're investing in education, investing in people, going to our post-secondary guests. I met with my Okanagan College and UBC Okanagan in the Kelowna Lake Country District that I represent, and I know that that's education and investing in people is our #1 priority for our future. So I just wanted to ask the representatives from the Student Association, as far as the budget 2009, we changed our funding for grants, and are you happy with moving the Millennium Scholarship to the new grant program?
Sure. In terms of 2009, we were reasonably happy with the results of that budget. We definitely were looking for the grants that were going to disappear when Millennium left, to be reinvested into students, and we are glad to see that happened. We're glad to see that happened on an income-based system, though we do believe there needs to be more work for more needs-based funding. But overall, we are certainly happy with that investment.
Thank you. I think don't have much time because I believe the chair would like to ask a question as well. So I'll move on to Ms. Kenny. You haven't had a chance to comment, and I appreciate the fact that you're one comment you mentioned, you have some ideas, some suggestions at no cost to taxpayers, which is a relief to all of us, of course, in these challenging economic times. And a member of the Canada-U.S. Interparliamentary Committee, and I was in a committee meeting in July with regard to discussions of the Mackenzie and the Alaska Pipeline project. And I know we have this major initiatives project office, and you talk about results-oriented regulation and balance it with environmental protection. How do you see us bringing in some, within the next budget, some initiatives to help move the Mackenzie and the Alaska pipeline projects forward based on those criteria?
I think that's an interesting question in terms of the Alaska and Mackenzie projects in particular. But directionally, one of the fundamental roles for government is to make sure that the decision-making can be taken in a way that is complete, does protect the environment, but is also timely enough to give investors a line of sight to know if they're putting up $20 or $30 billion, that they will have an answer as to whether or not they can proceed within some expected timeline. So I wouldn't advocate for specific monies involved with those northern projects, but absolutely be clear about the timelines involved in getting to decisions, and certainly reflect that south of 60 so that we have a framework in Canada that provides both investors certainty as far as timeliness of decision making, not a guarantee on approval, just timeliness, and a simplicity so that we can actually protect the environment without believing that layering on and longer is a way to achieve that.
Thanks. I know the First Nation, Aboriginal, and Inuit have a big role in that as well, so we'll continue to move that forward. Moving on to Mr. Anthony, also a big issue in British Columbia, obviously, is the Ontario tax policy for the film credit in the industry, and the industry has moved to Ontario in a big shift, and something that hopefully our British Columbia government will recognize.
Mr. Cannon?
I would like to see what happens with regard to your comments with the film industry. I met with Jason Priestley, who is Beverly 90210. He's also in the wine industry in the Okanagan, and looking at the idea of trying to stimulate the production industry. And two of your recommendations are a little vague. I just wanted to, if you can nail down or zero down a little bit more. Your first one, you talk about comprehensive enhancements. What would you visualize with comprehensive enhancements?
The primary instruments of direct investment on the part of the federal government are agencies like Telefilm Canada. Its level of support has been stalled for a number of years, so there's been a real dollar decline there. When you look at the rising demand and the flatlining of Telefilm and the other programs, you've got a big disparity there. We really need to kickstart the industry. Interestingly enough, you mentioned BC. Last year was a good year for BC compared to the rest of the country, although it wasn't a great year. But last year, and there's a point to this, last year we have some 700 members working and living in BC. Last year, of those 700 members, 100 did not work at all. Only 150 worked over 150 days. That's sort of less than half time. And therefore, 450 worked between 1 day and 149 days. We really need to get someone earlier mentioned investing in people. We really need to get our skilled, talented people back to work. You can't have a full-time industry based on part-time labor. And as I say, that was a good year for BC compared to the rest of the country. And I'm hoping that the BC government will look at Ontario and Quebec, and other provinces will do the same, and the federal government will put together a comprehensive, truly national program of tax credits that will really kickstart our industry and get it over the current problems that it's facing.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on one item with respect to Ms. Kenny, and Mr. Cannon did touch upon it with regulation. I mean, I think people generally agree, and when you say simplify the regulatory process, people generally nod their heads. But when you get down to specific regulations, there is generally reason for regulation. You mentioned the timeline. I don't know if you wanted to expand on what you mean by layering on of regulation. And the second item, and Mr. Pichetti also raised this with me, was when you talk about regulation to address the costs and obligations of retirement of pipeline assets, and you discuss it in your brief, but if you just want to sort of explain how that's going to work, this establishment of this prescribed trust, if you wanted to just address those two things.
Thank you. Firstly, with the layering on, right now in Canada, we have multiple pieces of legislation that often grind against each other rather than work well together to get to the end result of environmental protection and efficiency. Specifically, with the Major Projects Management Office, they've done a good job as an initial step of coordinating between those pieces of legislation. Now's the time to take a look at the overall system. That includes SIA for environmental assessment, it includes fisheries, it includes species at risk, it includes migratory birds, and it includes navigable waters. That is not to say any of those important pieces of legislation should be radically altered, but simply that the way we look at them together needs to be a lot smarter.
And when you say timeline, what's a ballpark on, 1 year, 2 years?
I think right now we often see major projects taking over 4 years. The goal when MPMO was launched was to bring that down to 2.
Okay.
We've yet to see that.
Okay. And on the second item about...
Yes, thank you for raising that. A qualified environmental trust is currently allowed for the mining industry, and what it is an opportunity for an incentive to move forward on setting aside monies for future reclamation. We believe now is a very good time on the pipeline sector to allow for a simple tax-efficient method to support that, and it does correspond to a decision from the major federal regulator of this year seeking the establishment of those sorts of funds.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I want to thank all of you for responding to our questions and coming and presenting your briefs and your submissions. It was an excellent discussion, presentations. We thank you all for being here. Colleagues, we thank you for your attendance, and we will see you tomorrow morning. Meeting adjourned.